A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headache.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So today's prompt from Daniel is about this exact tension we're seeing everywhere in the agent space right now. The vendor SDK versus the agnostic framework. He wants us to dissect whether that assumed lock-in, that moat, is really as deep as people think, and then talk about the flip side, the home field, advantage these vendor tools have.
And it's a perfect time to dig into this because the landscape has shifted dramatically just in the last few months. The OpenAI agents, SDK, landed in January, and Anthropic's been iterating fast on their tool use primitives. The choice isn't theoretical anymore, it's a concrete engineering decision. We're past the era of white papers and into the era of production bills.
Right. And the default assumption, the one I've always carried, is that if you pick, say, the OpenAI agents SDK, you're essentially building on quicksand that only supports their models. You're trading flexibility for, what, convenience? Is that actually true, or is it just good marketing from the framework builders? Because I hear that line all the time from the agnostic camp.
It's more perception than technical reality, but with a kernel of truth. Let's define our terms first because the language gets muddy. On one side, you have the agnostic frameworks, LangGraph, CrewAI, AutoGen, Pedantic AI. Their whole pitch is model flexibility. You write your agent logic once, and in theory, you can swap the underlying large language model from OpenAI to Anthropic to Mistral with a config change. The promise is you're building on bedrock, not quicksand.
And on the other side, the vendor SDKs. OpenAI's Agents SDK is the prime example. It's built by OpenAI. It's optimized for their models, and it gives you these nice, clean primitives. Agents, handoffs, guardrails that are designed to work seamlessly with the GPT family. It feels like a cohesive, well-documented garden path. The worry is that it's a walled garden.
The core of Daniel's question is about that moat. Does using the OpenAI SDK inherently lock you into their models? The technical answer is mostly yes, but not for the reasons people think. The lock-in isn't just a malicious business decision. It's a side effect of deep optimization. When you build a tool that's perfectly shaped for one thing, it often doesn't fit other things as well. It's like a Formula One steering wheel incredible for that specific car, but you wouldn't want to use it to drive to the grocery store in a minivan.
So it's less. You can't use other models. And more. The tool is so precisely machined for this one model that using anything else feels like trying to use a Phillips head screwdriver on a flathead screw. You can maybe force it, but it's not going to be a good time. The tool's very design assumes a certain shape.
It gets to the heart of it. Take function calling or tool use. OpenAI's implementation has very specific expectations about JSON schema formatting, about how the model signals its intent to call a tool, about error handling. Anthropic's tool use API has different conventions. If you're using the OpenAI SDK, it's handling all that translation for you, but it's translating to OpenAI's native format. It's a native speaker.
So, if I'm using LangGraph, I'm writing that translation layer myself, or relying on LangChain's abstraction. Which means when I want to switch from GPT-4 to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, I might have to go in and adjust how I define my tools, or how I parse the model's output. It's not a simple config flip. There's actual engineering work. That feels like a hidden tax.
And I mean, that's the right use of the word. There's a concrete case study here. A team migrates a LangGraph agent from GPT-4 to Claude 3.5. What breaks? Often, it's the structured output parsing. OpenAI's JSON mode and their newer structured outputs feature are incredibly reliable. You define a pedantic model, you get back perfect JSON that validates against it every time. Other models, even very good ones, can be more creative in their JSON generation. They might add a trailing comma or use single quotes or nest things slightly differently. In a complex agentic loop where one agent's output is another's input, that's a fatal error. The whole chain collapses.
That's a terrifying image for a production system, and it's a hidden cost of flexibility. You're not just swapping an API key, you're potentially building and maintaining multiple parsing pipelines, multiple error handling routines. Your agnostic codebase starts to fork. You end up with if model GPT-4, elif model GPT-4, elif model GPT-5, all over the place.
It does. Now here's the counterpoint and where the agnostic illusion comes in. Even if you're using LangGraph, you are absolutely going to get better performance if you tune your prompts and your tool definitions specifically for the model you're using. A prompt that works beautifully for GPT-4 might need a different few-shot example for Claude, or a different system prompt structure for Gemini. So the idea that you write once and run perfectly everywhere is a myth. You're always doing model-specific tuning. The question is whether your framework helps or hinders that.
Okay, so that's the Moat side. It's real, but it's more about optimization friction than an absolute technical barrier. It's a shallow moat with steep, slippery sides. Now let's flip it. What's the actual home field advantage? What do you get by using the vendor's own SDK that you might sacrifice with an agnostic framework? I assume it's not just warm feelings.
Latency, cost, and reliability. And these are not trivial things in production. Let's take Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Their internal benchmarks and independent tests have shown this too, show about 40% lower latency when you use their native tool use API compared to forcing structured output through JSON mode. Why? Because the model is specifically trained and optimized for that interaction pattern. The pathway from your request to the model's decision to call a tool to the formatted output is shorter, more direct, less lossy. It's a superhighway versus a country road.
40% is massive. That's the difference between an agent that feels snappy and responsive and one that feels like it's thinking too hard. In user-facing applications, that latency is everything. It's the difference between a delightful experience and a frustrating one.
And it translates directly to cost. Lower latency means less time your serverless function is spinning, less time you're paying for compute. If you're running thousands of agent loops a day, that adds up fast. The vendor SDK is often tapping into internal optimized pathways that a third-party framework by definition can't access. It's like the difference between taking a public bus and a dedicated company shuttle. The shuttle knows the exact route and doesn't stop.
So the trade-off is clear on one axis, flexibility versus performance. But is it always a clean trade-off? Are there scenarios where you get both, or where the choice is just wrong? I can't imagine a world where this is a simple binary.
Great question. This is where the practical decision framework comes in. I think the smart move now, in 2026, is a hybrid approach, and we're seeing this in production architectures. You use the vendor SDK for your core, high-throughput, latency-sensitive agent logic. That's your production-critical path. Then, you use an agnostic framework like LangGraph for the orchestration layer, for managing the state and handoffs between multiple specialized agents, some of which might be from different vendors. It's a best of both worlds strategy.
So, like a fintech startup I was reading about, they use the OpenAI agent's SDK for their core transaction analysis agent because it's screaming fast and reliable with GPT-4. But that agent sometimes needs to delegate to a specialized risk assessment agent that runs on Claude and a compliance check agent that runs on a fine-tuned Llama model. They use LangGraph to manage that whole dance, the state and the conversation history between these different specialists.
That's the blueprint. You get the home field optimization where it matters most for your most expensive or frequent calls, and you get the flexibility to incorporate best-of-breed models for specialized tasks. You're not putting all your eggs in one vendor basket, but you're also not forcing every single call through a generalized abstraction layer that adds overhead. It's strategic composition.
It also addresses the moat fear directly. You're not locked in because your orchestration layer is agnostic. If OpenAI dramatically raises prices or falls behind on quality, you can, with significant but manageable effort, migrate your core agent to another provider's SDK, because the surrounding architecture isn't dependent on it. The moat exists, but you've built a sturdy bridge over it.
The key insight is that the moat is shallower than it appears, but jumping over it still requires a running start. It's not free. The question for any team is the performance gain from home field optimization worth that potential future migration cost? For a startup where speed and unit economics are everything, the answer is often yes. For a large enterprise with a 5-year horizon and massive scale, maybe they invest in the agnostic layer from day one, absorbing the initial overhead for long-term flexibility.
This also changes how you think about prototyping versus production. In prototyping, when you're exploring what's even possible, an agnostic framework is a no-brainer. You want to test GPT-4 versus Claude versus Gemini on the same task with minimal code changes. You're optimizing for learning speed, not execution speed. It's about discovery.
Right. And then when you've proven the concept and identified the best model for your core loop, you might rebuild that critical path using the vendor's SDK to squeeze out every drop of performance. It's a natural life cycle. You prototype in the flexible framework, then you harden and optimize with the vendor-specific tool for the parts that need it. We actually touched on a similar trade-off in episode 1283 when we asked if your AI is thinking too much. Sometimes a simpler, optimized path beats a complex, flexible one.
So, to give our listeners a concrete takeaway, audit your current agent stack. Identify your critical path, the sequence of agent calls that is most frequent, most latency sensitive, or most costly. That's where you should seriously consider using the vendor's native tools. For everything else, for the orchestration, the experimentation, the multi-model parts, an agnostic framework gives you the flexibility you need. Be strategic, not dogmatic.
And don't fall for the absolutist arguments. The person who says vendor SDKs are always a trap is ignoring real performance and cost benefits. The person who says you must use our SDK is ignoring the legitimate need for flexibility and risk management. The sophisticated answer, as it almost always is it depends, and now you know what it depends on. It depends on your latency budget, your cost structure, your team skills, and your roadmap.
A beautifully balanced conclusion. I think we've thoroughly dissected Daniel's prompt. The moat is real but shallow. The home field advantage is tangible, and the winning move is often to play both fields strategically. It's about intelligent layering.
Agreed. The ecosystem is maturing past the one framework to rule them all, phase into a more nuanced, pragmatic era of composition. We're building tool chains, not monoliths. The open question is whether standards like MCP might eventually dissolve that moat further. But for now, strategic composition is the name of the game.
Well said. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop, and big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for all the ways to subscribe. Until next time.
This episode was produced using Xiaomi Mimo V2 Pro. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth